Cross. Now, we've had access to, over time, the Red Cross, the International Humanitarian Law Program and its various courses. Were you drawn to them because of that?
Yeah, and that's what my volunteer work with them focuses on. I've worked with the Clara Barton Moot Court competition, and I'm an expert IHL instructor for them, and I was drawn to them because of their work in the field.
Was your parents, anybody in the law at all? Was this your family background?
My uncle's a lawyer.
Okay, that's as close as you got, huh?
Yeah.
So when you got out of college, did you think law was going to be part of your career?
I did. I went directly from undergrad to law school.
Undergrad being William and Mary, right?
That's right.
And then you went from there to Georgetown.
Yeah.
How does one manufacture themselves to become kind of an international criminal law world? I mean, I'm looking at your extensive resume here, and it's pretty impressive.
You're far too kind, particularly because the answer to that is mostly luck. For some people who'd had very long careers before going into it, perhaps some of it is skill. But for all of these jobs, I think there's more people who want to do them than there are jobs. That's true of a lot of fields.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of being in the right place at the right time. And for me, that happened a few times. One of the ways that I think I feel very lucky in my career is having started with working on Bosnia shortly after law school, which is...
How did that happen? I mean, just don't start to work on Bosnia. I mean, did you... I know many prosecutors have fined and they look at schools and they grab people, but were you one of them?
No, I applied. I did a fellowship at the court there my first year out working for judges. So I'd done a trial court clerkship here in the States in Pennsylvania and went from there to working for a trial panel in Bosnia. And it gave me a sense of and a connection with and an experience of this really incredible place that later in my career, a couple of years later in my career, I had the honor of working on and focusing on in my work for about 8 years.
So, just for the record here, you had worked with Justice Deborah Todd and Arthur Zulik.
That's right.
In Pennsylvania, and then found yourself, were you in the court's chambers in Bosnia?
That's right.
Yeah. To get yourself from there onto the prosecution side, how did that happen?
So I went from there, I actually came back from there to clerk for Justice Todd and did about a year and a half with her right when she joined the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, which was an incredible learning experience. And from there went to chambers at ICTR, the Rwanda Tribunal. Spent about a year working for the judges on a couple of very large genocide cases arising out of Rwanda, and was looking to get a little bit more advocacy experience. And it happened that one of the trial teams in The Hague was looking for a writer to assist with the final brief. It was the Shechel team. So I went up, worked on that, spent about 2 years on that case. And then when we finished, the Mladic trial was starting, and I got picked up for that, wound up in court a great deal over the next 5 years, working with an incredible team of attorneys on what's been the largest single project of my career, probably of my life.
Well, talk more about Mladic. Now, the camera, the people are going to watch and say, that's just a name, but we know he was one of the 3-4 top criminals, and he was on the lam for a long time.
That's right. He was a fugitive for about 15 years. I was working at ICTY. I'd been working there a little while when he was first apprehended in Serbia, and it was one of the first big events that you can kind of feel in the building that you're working in, the magnitude of what had happened. I wasn't on the case yet. When I worked on it,
Did you have a sense, or did the building folks have a sense that they knew where he was? It was just a matter of time. Was this a complete surprise?
I wasn't working on the tracking team at the time, so it was a surprise to me. But that doesn't mean it was a surprise to everybody. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I think not only do I not want to speak for anybody else on it, of course, generally apprehending one of these fugitives is a result of years of hard work by lots of people, some of whom I had the privilege of working with. I don't know if they were surprised on the day, but I know they'd done a lot of work to get to that point.
So Mladic all of a sudden is brought in. I assume had he been indicted by then? So he was then arraigned? Yeah. Is that the next step? Mm-hmm.
And they had an initial appearance, and then there's a pretrial process. And one of the things to understand about that compared to a domestic case is the magnitude of relevant information that you're dealing with. So like a domestic case, the prosecutors have to disclose relevant information to the defense and have to give them a sense of what the prosecution's case is going to look like. Mm-hmm. Here's the specific incidents we're charging, here's the witnesses we're going to call, here's the exhibits that we may tender into evidence. And when you're dealing with a universe of 14 million potentially relevant documents, 30,000 of which or so show up on the list of potential exhibits, and hundreds of witnesses, it's only fair that the defense have some time to prepare for trial. And so it was about, as I recall, about a year between when he was apprehended and when trial began.
So what were you doing in the meantime? Had you been assigned to the team at that point?
Not yet. So we were finishing my first case at ICTY then, and it was about early April of 2012 that I was assigned to it. We'd finished closing arguments in Sheshel, my first case, mm-hmm. and I'd come home with not sure what I was going to do in The Hague, and I'd taken a couple of weeks off to reconnect with people back here that I'd lost contact with, and perhaps to figure out a little bit what I was going to do next. Did probably more reconnecting than figuring things out, and went back to The Hague and was told, well, you're under contract for another year and a half. You're going to have to do something. You should go see this lawyer, Camille Bibles was her name. She's now a judge in Arizona, who was at the time running the part of the case that I was assigned to, that I wound up running later in the trial. And we hit it off, thankfully, and wound up working together, and wound up working together for years on that part of the case. And she's wound up otherwise being one of the most important professional relationships in my life.
So Mladic, we got Karadzic, Mladic, those are the two guys, on the lam. They kind of were arrested roughly the same time. I remember here at these law dialogues, Serge Brammert's talking about when they were on the lam, and then ultimately that they'd been arrested, and the excitement they built and hope for results. Now, what was the challenge of Mladic? Because that's the one you were assigned to.
I think I want to start with going back to that quantity of information.
Sure.
And at the beginning of the public delivery of the trial judgment, it's stepping back for a second for particularly Americans who may watch this. We're used to a jury trial, where at the end of the case, the presiding judge says, how do you rule? And the foreperson of the jury says, guilty or not guilty. And that's it. There's no explanation. These are trials presided over by a panel of judges that will write an extensively footnoted explanation of how they got to the outcome. Thousands of pages in a complex case like Mladic, for instance, or like Karadzic. So at the beginning of the public summary of the judgment, which took an hour or two to read in court and to deliver, the presiding judge, a Dutch judge named Alphonse Ori, summarized the evidence that had come before the court in the trial. And he said, we admitted about 10,000 exhibits into evidence. We received the evidence of about 600 witnesses. We took judicial notice of about 2,000 facts found in previous cases at ICTY. And he said this at transcript page 44,908. And getting your head around that kind of quantity of material in a way that enables you to litigate it competently is a huge challenge, and it requires a really good team of people, a really dedicated team of people.
And you were part of that.
I was.
And so during that 5-year period, did Mladic, did he have his counsel? Did he have his own counsel? Or was
Of course, yeah.
And was he? Want to say, was he well represented?
Yeah, he had lawyers who were experienced at the tribunal, and they did the courtroom work.
Right.
I've learned through international criminal law of some other lawyers who helped him on the brief that I didn't even know were on his team at the time, for instance. But we all thought he had a very professional team working with him. It was a team that had worked several ICTY cases, some of whom had experience and expertise on the specific crime sites that were at issue in Mladic.
So for the camera, again, Mladic was charged with what?
So the term I'm going to use is joint criminal enterprise, which for American viewers, the most similar thing is conspiracy law. Basically, the three things to know about a joint criminal enterprise are that it's joint, that is, more than one person does it and they do it together. It's criminal, that is, it involves a crime that the court has jurisdiction over. And it's an enterprise, it's something they go out and do and take concrete steps towards accomplishing. So he was charged with 4 different ones. The first was what we called the hostage JCE. And this involved allegations that in 1995, he and other Serb leaders had orchestrated the capture of a number of peacekeepers, who some of them were tied to potential NATO bombing targets to avoid military intervention against the Bosnian Serbs. The second, the Sarajevo JCE, alleged a long 3.5-year or so campaign to terrorize the civilian population of Sarajevo, primarily through shelling and sniping that targeted the civilians directly. The third, the Srebrenica genocide. The Srebrenica JCE was about the genocide in July 1995, the elimination of the Bosnian Muslim enclave in Srebrenica, involving, among other things, the organized murder operation that victimized more than 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys, the expulsion of the remaining population. And the fourth, what we called the overarching JCE, dealt with what you might colloquially call, using the perpetrator's language, the ethnic cleansing of large swaths of the country. One of the most kind of common visual images of that is emaciated prisoners behind barbed wire in camps in northwestern Bosnia in the summer of 1992 in an area called Prijedor that was being targeted for particularly brutal ethnic cleansing. And it's those images, I think, that played a particularly important historic role in prompting the establishment of the tribunal. And it's that last part, the overarching JCE, where I was one of the people who ran that part of the case.
You say running it, I mean, you have a team, they're gathering the evidence, they're probably preparing the opening statement. So is that my sense that?
That's right. It's also the case that this is a trial with 600 witnesses, and none of the lawyers was going to take all 600. And for my part, where there were 14 different municipalities involved, where there were very serious charges in all of them, having incredibly talented lawyers, incredibly dedicated lawyers who developed expertise in the evidence in a particular area, who worked with witnesses from a particular area, who cross-examined senior level witnesses from a particular area, was essential to getting the job done effectively.
Mladic's title in the government was what?
He was the chief of the main staff of the Bosnian Serb army, so the senior most military commander.
Karadzic was?
The president of Republika Srpska.
Milosevic at the time, was he the president? And then when he died, Karadzic took over?
Milosevic was in Serbia, And so Republika Srpska is the breakaway Serb entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia, of course, is Serbia, which is a separate country.
Thank you for that. And so after 5 years, you finally get to closing statement. Did the verdict take forever?
The verdict was about 11 months after closing statements. And the product of what I imagine was a very intense drafting process for the judges and their team. For us, it had been a very intense year getting up to that point, drafting a final trial brief, analyzing then over the course of about a month the defense brief, and crafting what we wanted to help the judges understand in weighing the two, synthesizing the evidence, and coming up with their own judgment.
So during that 11-month period, you're waiting. And I know you're working, but you're still waiting. I saw that with David Crane and Sierra, just waiting for the Taylor result. Was that similar in your Mladic case?
Well, I didn't see it with David Crane in Sierra Leone, so I wouldn't want to compare it to anybody else's experience. But I think it's a time when you're very conscious of the historical responsibility that attaches to the work that you've done already, and spend a lot of time hoping that your work lives up to that responsibility.
Did you worry you might get an adverse result?
I don't think I consciously worried as much about the outcome. For me, it was mostly the feeling I would have, the thought I would have was mostly, oh, I wish I'd said this in closings. Oh, I wish I said that. It would have helped crystallize a particular point for the judges in a way that, there were 4 of us giving closings. All parts of the case are really important, and those were great lawyers who were very generous with my share of the time. So I shouldn't have asked for any more than I got. But still, there are things you leave out, thoughts you have walking down the street or watching television, and it's a particularly impactful version of that feeling we all have. You have a conversation and you're driving down the street the next day and you're like, I should have said this. That really would have showed him, and there's a sense where you are analyzing and reanalyzing the work that you've done, and hoping that what you actually did is worthy of the occasion and worthy of the responsibility that you have.
How did you know there was a decision? Did some sort of memo go around saying, hey, 11 o'clock tomorrow, we're going to announce our decision?
It was further in advance than that. I don't remember exactly how far in advance it was now, but we had at least a month. It came down the day before Thanksgiving in 2017, very, very close to the end of the work of the ICTY.
Were you surprised by the verbiage or any of the, the result was a conviction?
I think 2 things. First, that I read the judgment, or almost all of it, over the course of that weekend, which is a very long process. I think, given the length, I'm one of the very few people in the world, I'm sure, who's tried to digest it in that quick a period of time. But the second is that that's not the part I remember. That what I remember is the feeling of both relief that our work had been worthy of the moment and of our responsibility, and of togetherness with the people that I'd worked with on the case, many of whom had come back from other jobs, who'd moved on in their lives, to be present for the judgment. And that was really powerful. I think I'd add maybe a third thing that I hadn't seen at the time that really sticks with me about it. There's a documentary about the case that a couple of British filmmakers did, and they're talking to a survivor of the crimes outside afterwards. And one of them asks him, is it over now? And he says no, and they ask him, is it justice? And he says yes, and my recollection is he smiles. And I hope I'm remembering that right, because it's something that brings me a sense, too, of closure and of hope that he and other people in that position, other survivors of the crimes, had gotten that feeling of closure out of the process.
Was it as important for the conviction as it was for you and your team to create the record?
I think those are both very important. I think when you get to judgment in a case like that, there are parts of the record that will feel incomplete if the outcome is an acquittal. And I've been in other cases where there wasn't a conviction on everything, but there were important factual findings on crimes in a particular municipality, for instance, that hadn't been made before. And we felt a sense of pride about that those survivors, or in some cases, those murdered victims, had been named, had been acknowledged. But I think it's, when you're really confident in your case, it's a more complete feeling when the outcome matches what you think the evidence shows.
Now, the chief prosecutor at the time was Serge Bammertz. Do you recall having some sort of celebratory gathering with Serge?
I think there's a lot of feelings at a time like that. But I remember sitting with him in his office, a few of us, Alan Teeger and Peter McCloskey, the senior trial attorneys, Adam Weber, who argued the Sarajevo part of the case, Abir Hassan, who, together with Peter, managed the Srebrenica part, and myself, sitting with him in his office after the judgment and talking through it, and a feeling of satisfaction that came from that. I remember he met with victims groups that day, and I thought that was the right priority for him to have at the time.
Did you, during that 11-month period, anticipate or prepare for appeals? I mean, did you do that? Or is that sort of a...
Of course. And at ICTY, as at several of the international institutions and some domestic prosecutors' offices, the trial and appeals phases are handled by different lawyers, or at least some of the lawyers are different. And so part of our work as the trial team was helping the appeal team get up to speed on this. I described earlier the size of the evidentiary record. So somebody coming in from the appeals team was not, in those 11 months, going to read 44,000 pages of transcript, review comprehensively the evidence of 600 witnesses. So it's our role as trial team members to help them get familiar with the part of the case that they're going to be responsible for on appeal, help them anticipate what issues might be, and help them get their head around the core of the evidence.
So at the trial level, you get the conviction on all 4 counts?
So there's 4 parts of the case, and he was convicted for all 4.
Yeah.
There were 11 counts, and he was convicted of 10 of the 11. He was charged with genocide in 2 separate counts, genocide at Srebrenica and genocide in 6 of the municipalities that were the targets of what, again, using the perpetrator's language, I'll call the ethnic cleansing campaign. And he was convicted of genocide in Srebrenica, but not convicted of genocide, acquitted of genocide in the other municipalities.
And we're up on appeal? I mean, is that automatic? I mean, does...
Parties have to file a notice of appeal. In this case, the defense did, and the crucial parts of the judgment were all confirmed on appeal. I don't remember if there were small details that were changed, that were at issue, but the crucial parts were all confirmed.
And then there's a sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
What was his sentence?
Life.
Life. Where is he now?
I'm not sure.
What is he, probably in The Hague? I mean, this all happened in The Hague, right? I mean, the trial.
This all happened in The Hague, and so as of June of 2021, when the appeals judgment came down, my understanding is that's where he was. Often, ICTY defendants who are convicted are transferred to serve their sentence somewhere else, and I simply didn't check before we spoke whether he had been or whether there was any public information about it, but I'm not sure.
Well, the other trial that was going on at the same time, it was Karadzic, and just for the camera, what happened to him?
He's also convicted, also got a life sentence, and in that case got a life sentence on appeal after getting, I think it was a 40-year sentence at trial. And we benefited, I think, on Mladic from the expertise that some of the other lawyers in the office had developed on Karadzic and on other closely related cases.
So trial's over, you call home and say, hey, bingo, we did it. What's your next step?
I came home. So the immediate next step for me, I started checking out of the office the afternoon of judgment. My contract ended the next week. And I spent some of that time preparing for an appeal on another case that was going to be argued in December. But came home with the intention of building a practice in the United States, spending a little more time with my family and the people that I'd grown up with.
A practice. Talk about a practice. I mean, I'm a practitioner. But to go from the International Criminal Tribunal to Yugoslavia to hanging up a shingle and I'm not sure where you're from, but hanging up a shingle. How does that happen?
It's interesting because we do kind of a unique kind of work. And I've wound up in a position where a lot of what I've done has continued to be what I sometimes refer to as very bad things law. There's been a variety. I've worked on amicus briefs at the Supreme Court, on filings at the ICC, on large-scale sexual abuse case and civil litigation here in the United States. But most of it has wound up being the type of large-scale wrongdoing that I was working on in The Hague. I have not wound up doing a more day-to-day kind of practice. And that's had its challenges, but it's also left me continuing to do very meaningful work, and I've felt very lucky about that.
Where are you located?
I'm in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Near Allentown.
Okay.
I'm from Easton.
Okay. Larry Holmes.
Exactly. There's a big statue of him nearby.
You're next to Larry, you're the biggest name out of Easton.
No, that's definitely not true.
I met him a couple of times. I'm sure you have too.
I have.
Yeah,
He's,
big guy.
yeah, and he's a pillar of the community.
Yeah, yeah. Is he really? I mean, is he active in the community? Is that?
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, belongs to me. So, what's the question I should be asking you? And I'm going to let you then go out and party.
You've been pretty comprehensive. The thing I realized that I should have said is, just to make clear that I'm speaking for myself based on my experience, and while I'm wearing an American Red Cross hat because it's a great hat and they do good work in IHL, and I do some volunteering with them, I'm neither an employee nor speaking for the Red Cross at the moment.
That's a great caveat. I've got a Jamestown Tarp Skunks baseball hat right there. I don't speak for them anymore.
Do they have strong opinions about international humanitarian law?
They really do. So, delighted you're here. I'm just delighted. Have you found something, a surprise while you've been here for the last couple of days? Something you didn't think was going to happen, or?
I didn't come in with a ton of expectations, but I've been really pleased. It's been, I think, a very warm group of people, and it's I suppose it would have been very hard to expect the place to be as beautiful or the weather to be as perfect as it has been. So it's been a really nice setting, a really nice way to spend a couple of days, and I'm very grateful to have been invited.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. This has been wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.